Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be asking, can Israel meet Europe's energy needs, particularly as Europe tries to wean itself off its dependency on Russian gas? Well, welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from Israel. Her name is Gina Cohen, and she is an international natural gas expert and also a professor at Technion University in Israel. Gina, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme, especially coming from Israel as well.
Thank you.
Gina, can you just share with us something about your background? I just spoke to you just before the programme and that you're born in Westminster in England, then you made Aliyah. So can you just share with us your story of your life growing up here in London and then making Aliyah to Israel?
Well, I grew up in London, indeed, in Westminster. My stepfather was a member of Parliament. He then became a Lord. He was the deputy chairman of the House of Lords. But when I was 18, I decided to make Aliyah, went to live in Israel, got married, have kids. About 25 years ago, if we go back to the gas story, British Gas, and that puts the Israeli side and the British side together, British Gas said they want to come to Israel and start explore for natural gas. And they want to interview me for a job. And I thought, well, this is a likely story. Gas in Israel, I will believe it when I see it. But I got the job and I started working, and lo and behold, that was the beginning of the first gas discoveries in 2000 in Israel.
Which was quite an incredible discovery as well, especially for Israel's energy needs. But Gina, can you share, where did your passion and your interest in gas and becoming a consultant and an expert on natural gas, where did that all stem from?
Well, it's by chance, because I started working in British Gas. We had discovered a gas field offshore Gaza. It was after the peace accord, the Oslo peace accord between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We discovered this gas field offshore Gaza, and we discovered a small gas field in Israel. And I was invited to go to a talk in the Knesset, in the Parliament, and I got there, and I didn't know anything about gas at the time, so I told my manager, this is not a talk on gas, but it's a select committee against Israel buying any Palestinian gas. And I said, well, what do I do? He said, well, whatever you do, don't say anything. And I thought, well, of course I'm not going to say anything. I don't know anything about gas. This was right at the beginning. This was 2000, and I was in Parliament with all the ministers. 10 minutes into the debate, they started talking against gas, against British Gas, against Palestinians, against cooperation. And I thought to myself, I can't just sit quietly. I got up and made a speech in Parliament, went back to the office and thought, I'm going to get fired. But instead he said, we're not going to shut you up, we're going to teach you. Send me back to the UK for intensive courses on gas and regulation. And I got deeply involved into it. In 2001, Israel started enacting the first gas law, and I was a representative of British Gas in the Parliament to enact the clauses of the gas law. And I've been teaching, lecturing, writing, working for the gas companies, and that's for the last 20 years.
Amazing. This is an issue that I haven't touched on very much before, but I know it's becoming an even bigger issue, particularly as we look to Europe and Europe's energy crisis as well. But can I ask you, when British Gas were exploring for possible gas off the coast of Israel and the coast of Gaza, they must have had some indication that there might be gas there. Where do you think that came from?
Well, it came from following the geology from Egypt northwards. There had been a lot of gas already discovered in Egypt, and certain geologists from British Gas and even one or two in Israel thought the geology would continue northwards towards Israel, and it in fact of course did, and then went on towards Cyprus. So we had a few prospects. And yes, British Gas started drilling or doing some surveys to discover the first gas field, Tamar, and eventually also Leviathan. British Gas eventually left Israel, unfortunately, and was then bought over, even as we know, 5 years ago by Royal Dutch Shell. But now the Tamar fields and Leviathan fields are being operated and managed by companies like Chevron from America, Mubadala from the Emirates, Ratio, Delek. So it's sort of very much local and international companies. We have a Greek company, a Greek-British company called Energean. They're going to start producing gas any day now in Israel. So we've got a plethora of companies working in Israel.
Amazing,
yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And Gina, can you also share something about Israel? That Israel is an incredible innovator as far as a nation is concerned, and then now could be a mass energy supplier, which is quite incredible when we think about the early days of the pioneering of the state and how the early pioneers had to kind of plough through all the swamplands in the north, drain it from the marshes because of the mosquitoes that were killing a lot of the pioneers, and pretty much they thought it was desert, and yet we see that Israel has turned the desert into an absolute beautiful garden, and we only have to go to Israel to see how beautiful Israel is and what the Israelis have done with it. So share with us why Israel is such a nation of innovation and development.
Well, we've got people coming from every country of the world who sort of emigrated to Israel. That helps. If you have a pool of different genes in different countries, and education has always been very important for the Jews around the world also. And then I think explicitly, because when you go to a difficult country and you're not surrounded by oil and gas to begin with, you have to do something. You have to do something to develop your country. And so it developed as a startup nation, as a high-tech nation, hard workers. People are working very hard in Israel. So in a way, it's lucky that we did not discover the gas 50, 60, 70 years ago, not too early. And it's lucky that we did not discover it in 20 years when the world is moving towards another direction. I think we discovered this source of energy exactly at the right time for the development of the country, for our needs, and as you said now, Simon, also to be able to even export it whilst the world, and especially Europe and England, are suffering from this really bad energy crisis.
Absolutely, and to think that Israel's first export, when the State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May 1948, after Israel's War of Independence, was oranges. So we've now gone from exporting oranges to Europe to the possibility of exporting gas to Europe. That's quite a transformation in the past 70 years, is it not?
Well, we're exporting gas already to Egypt, which is also interesting because, as I said, the geologists first discovered the geology from Egypt to Israel, and Egypt has a lot of gas, much more than Israel. But then Egypt has a population of 105 million and growing as we speak. So they need huge volumes of gas, but Israel already has been exporting gas to Egypt for about 2 years, and to Jordan. And Europe is, contrary to America, which is a net energy exporter, has its own oil and gas and coal and even parts for renewable energy. The Europeans are an importer. They have to import gas, coal from Poland, oil. So indeed, this is one source that Europe could be importing to try and replace some of the gas from Russia, which it does not want to take anymore.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent video produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that looks at how Israel is a climate of innovation.
Israel, a climate of innovation. Where there are big catastrophes, Israel creates big solutions. Where people desire clean water, Israel desires to innovate. Where pollution is on the rise, Israel rises with breakthrough ideas. Where there are impossible conditions, Israel leads impossible revolutions. Whenever, wherever, and for whoever, we are using our hearts, minds, and resources to make the world a better place. Because being innovative is in our nature.
As we saw in that excellent video there, produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, that Israel is at the cutting edge of innovation and technology and now could be a major gas supplier. Gina, can you share what you mentioned just a moment ago that Egypt has a lot of gas and that now Israel's exporting gas to Egypt as well as Jordan. How is this kind of discovery of natural gas and now it's developing that gas to actually sell it commercially is actually proving relations between Egypt and Jordan as well?
Well, the relations indeed have improved. They were based for many years on security needs, on Israel providing all kinds of security information to the regime in Egypt, and of course Israel being very aware of its own need for security. So it was like a one unilateral kind of relationship. And now it's expanded to commerce. And the commerce and the gas and the energy can touch every single human being. Of course, security and personal security is one of the most important things that everybody feels, but it's not felt on an individual level. We can see here in Europe when people have to pay $50,000 or sterling a year to keep a grocery going, that energy is vital for every single solitary person. And so when the Egyptian man in the street and the Jordanian man and woman in the street gets energy from Israel, that can improve relations on an individual basis, and it's very, very important for all the countries, for the whole Eastern Mediterranean. It's vitally important.
Absolutely. And now with this discovery of gas over the past 20 years, you were saying back in 2000, how has that helped the Israeli economy, firstly? And then secondly, how does Israel still import its kind of energy needs? Because when Israel obviously defeated Egypt in the Six-Day War, Israel took control of the Sinai Peninsula, and of course in that historic peace agreement with Egypt in '79, Israel then had to hand back the Sinai as part of that peace agreement, in which Israel was fully sufficient in Egyptian oil, and that was one of the sacrifices that Israel made for peace. So share with us how the online of natural gas has improved Israel's energy security.
Well, the main fields were discovered 10 years ago. The first field was discovered 20 years ago. The main fields, Tamar, Leviathan, and then Karish, were discovered in the last decade. So yes, of course, the energy world is divided between the fossil fuels, which is oil, gas, and coal. Israel is still importing some coal because we still have about 25% of our electricity generation from coal. We import it from Russia, unfortunately, from South Africa, but we're going to completely be cutting down our use of coal and replacing all our power generation to be produced by natural gas and renewables. So coal is going to be out of the equation. Of course, oil. One needs oil. One needs oil for transportation, for aviation, for certain manufacturing products. I don't think you're sort of giving anything up for peace. Peace is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So that's, I don't think anybody ever regrets, especially we have a very good relationship or an improving relationship with Egypt. We don't have any oil. We do have some liquids, some condensates within the gas fields. And some of this goes to the oil refineries in Israel, and that can be used partially for some of our needs. The new field which is coming online, which is called Karish, is even more liquid. Some of this may be exported or may remain in Israel, but you see the oil market is a global market. It is not complicated to buy oil, and there's a global price. Gas is much more complicated because gas in America, for instance, the price over the last 6 months has been like $4, $5, $6. Here in Europe, it went up to $85 in the middle of the crisis. Gas is a very difficult product to transport. So if you have it in your own country, this is vitally important for your economy, for your security of energy, for your self-security. So having gas is, in a way, even more important than having oil. So we have the gas. It's improved our GDP. It's improved our security. It's improved our international relations. It's very, very important.
Amazing. It's an amazing gift, isn't it? And Gina also explained to us how Europe has got into this horrendous energy crisis that Europe is facing, Britain is facing now with astronomical energy bills that Europe's facing. Our household ourselves, we haven't put the heating on and don't plan to put the heating on until it gets very, very cold. So can you explain to us how Europe has got into this kind of energy crisis that it's currently in?
I think that Europe has mostly its own self to blame. Short-term policies policies based on scaremongering. Scaremongering, I'm referring here mostly to climate crisis, over fearsomeness about the dangers of climate crisis, which has caused Europe to go to an extreme position of getting rid of fossil fuels, getting rid of nuclear because of another fear. So over-reliance on renewable energy before the technology exists in order to make Europe secure. And on the gas front, because Europe felt, in my view, that gas was no longer the flavor of the month or the flavor of the decade, they said, well, we don't need to drill, we don't need to do shale drilling, we don't need to sign long-term contracts like the Chinese and the Japanese. They've been signing contracts for 20, 25 years. The Europeans have been loath to doing this. They've relied excessively on Russia to obtain 40% of their gas, because pipelines existed, because the Russians were very keen for geopolitical reasons and financial reasons to build the pipelines. The gas was relatively cheap from Russia. So they said, okay, we have on this one hand the renewables, and on the other hand we've got Russian gas, and everything is fine. And it wasn't fine. I mean, people like me from the outside, I could see this was not going to be fine. But a bit surprising that most of the Europeans did not see this. I mean, France, of course, from de Gaulle, they saw this. They said we cannot rely simply on renewables. We have to have nuclear. So they're in a better position, of course.
No, absolutely. And also, you know, when we hear our government, the British government here, talking about the energy crisis, it's always referring to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. But when you actually read American reports and American journalists writing on the situation in Britain, it's pretty fair to say that they say do not follow Britain's example in following this policy of zero and net emissions, which our government is obsessed with, having signed up to the UN climate change as well. So how much is down to pursuing that policy, plus getting rid of, as you said, fossil fuels as well, which is reliable energy, and relying on kind of wind and solar and wave energy that don't produce as much electricity as we need to meet our energy demands. So why do you think our particular government is not being transparent with its energy failure?
Well, if they call it a crisis, they seem to imply that it happened because of nobody's policies decisions. It just happened. A volcano erupted or an earthquake happened. So this is the wrong interpretation, because there was a failure of policy, a failure of long-term policy. I mean, even if you look at earthquakes, when people say the tragedy or the crisis of an earthquake, even that is not totally correct, because one knows that earthquakes could happen. So if you build buildings in a way which is strong enough to withstand the earthquakes, then you do not have the crisis of the earthquake. So Europe should have known that batteries and wind and renewables are not available yet, and will not be available for at least another few decades in a sustainable manner. And they failed to look at the long-term policies, and I think they're still failing to look at long-term policies and how to get out of this crisis. They're looking at the short term. They're looking at this year, maybe looking at next year. They think the crisis is going to last 3 or 4 years, and so they're looking for short-term solutions. I think they're making the same mistake. They're repeating the same mistakes.
Quite frightening. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news video that is called Europe's Historical Energy Crisis Threatens Global Security.
Some Europeans are so angry over sky-high energy bills, they're burning them. Others are starting to gather firewood for winter. These are some of the wealthiest nations in the world, and yet citizens are wondering if they're going to be able to heat their homes when the weather turns cold. London's mayor is warning that millions won't be able to afford food or heat this winter.
We're at prices which are 10 to 15 times the 10-year average. People can't afford to pay that much for their energy bills.
Europe's closure of hundreds of power plants in favor of wind and solar, and its decision to rely on Russia for 40% of its natural gas have backfired badly. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines from Russia to Germany are both offline now after being rocked by an explosion last week, what is suspected to be sabotage. Germany was warned repeatedly by then-President Donald Trump that it was making a big mistake by turning to Russia for energy, including this speech at the United Nations in 2018.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course.
Germany's UN delegation appeared to laugh at Trump's warning. They're not laughing in Germany now. Dr. Holger Thus in Germany is the president of the European Institute for Climate and Energy.
It's crazy. Everybody's afraid of the upcoming winter. And nobody really knows what's going to happen. And nobody also knows where the energy is going to come from.
Businesses across Europe that can no longer afford their monthly energy bills are shutting down. The value of the euro and the British pound have dropped dramatically. And despite an energy crisis that has turned into an economic crisis, European nations are continuing to close and dismantle nuclear reactors. 10 years ago, Germany had 17 nuclear reactors. It's decided to keep only 2. And only as backups. America should learn a lesson from Europe's energy crisis, but the Biden administration seems to be going down the same road. The White House wants America on 100% green energy in just 13 years. And congressional Democrats continue to pressure banks to stop funding the oil and gas industry.
Answer with a simple yes or no. Does your bank have a policy against funding new oil and gas products? Mr. Diamond.
Absolutely not, and that would be the road to hell for America.
It has certainly been the road to economic hell in Europe, which is now bracing for a winter of social unrest. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And excellent report there put together by CBN on Europe's energy crisis. Gina, can you just explain the situation? Because in Britain we are going to face, no doubt, a very tough winter. The government has possibly announced that we could, and also energy companies are saying that we could facing energy blackouts this winter in December, that we could have our energies cut from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then again from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 p.m, which is absolutely frightening. It feels like we're going back into the Stone Age. But the situation in Germany is far worse because most of their heating and their energy comes from their use of gas, and of course that comes from Russia. And of course we saw in that report there the absolutely crazy decision to actually knock down 25 of their nuclear reactors and only have 2 in its place. It's madness. So where's all this thinking coming from within Germany and across the continent of Europe, not actually to look after its energy reserves and its energy sources, putting thousands, if not millions of people's lives into poverty?
Well, I think Germany, more than any other country, felt that the link of pipelines between Russia and Germany would make it secure energy-wise. It did not think it was putting its inhabitants at danger. It thought the commercial ties, which we described before, are important, but it overestimated the commercial ties between Russia and Germany, misunderstanding the different cultures, because a culture like Russia thinks totally differently than the culture as Germany, and they did not understand how Putin's way of thinking is totally different to Western Europe. So they over-relied on Russia to the extent that they did not even have what is called as liquefied natural gas, from which, if you have those kind of facilities, you can buy gas nearly from anywhere in the world, or from many other countries in the world. And they said, we don't need this. We have these 2 or 3 pipelines coming from Russia. And they have coal, and they have a lot of solar energy. They went very strongly on solar energy. At horrendous cost to the economy, and maybe not necessary, because maybe the climate crisis is over-exaggerated. They spent huge amounts on solar energy on a country which is not blessed with a lot of sun. And as you said, and as we saw in the program, they shut down all but 2 or 3 of their nuclear power stations. I think they still have 3 left. And they tried for the last 6 months to keep them going, but they do not have the uranium, and they do not have the maintenance, and they do not have the upkeep of these nuclear stations to keep them safe. So they're going to have to close them down even if they want to keep them going. So they can keep them maybe on as a backup, but very, very little efficiency and very few hours. So yes, Germany, as we know, is now taken loans for 200 up to $300 billion or euros to pay for these huge energy costs, which is going to be a burden on the economy for many years.
Absolutely, but also isn't there a great danger, particularly our government has done as well, and that's to protect energy prices by pumping billions of pounds to the energy companies to ensure that it doesn't affect the population as badly as it could. So how have we got ourselves in a situation where potentially, because of these massive failures in energy security, securing our source of energy, moving so quickly to renewable energy and moving away from dependable energy, that we're actually putting a whole Europe's population at risk, sending millions into poverty, destroying businesses because businesses need energy to produce goods, that we're threatening the whole kind of livelihoods of British and European citizens.
The thing is, I don't really have another solution of what you could do, because the policies are policies that have emanated from the last 10 or 20 years. Now you are in the middle of this crisis, you can't let people starve. So of course you have to make sure that whatever decision you make doesn't make it worse. I mean, for instance, if you give subsidies for energy, that is okay for the short term, but it's going to make the price go up because people will consume more. They won't consume less, they'll consume more, means there'll be less, means the price will go up. If you tax the oil and gas companies or the renewable companies, okay, that sounds good also, because you take the money from these companies who are now earning a lot of money and you're giving it to the citizens, but then those companies can say, okay, we're not going to continue drilling, we're not going to continue producing. This is one of the things that is happening in America. I mean, Biden is saying, on the one hand, okay, we don't want our banks to subsidize or to fund oil and gas, but then when they're not funding oil and gas, he goes off to Saudi Arabia to beg for them to produce more oil so that the price of oil will go down. So there's a sort of total mismatch in policies and lots of conflicts. In the middle of a crisis, it's very difficult for the government to decide what to do. And mostly, I think it's very important for Europe not to focus on short-termism, not to do knee-jerk reactions, and to really sit down with the task force and decide what has to be done to mitigate the worst possible consequences, but to think for the long term. The worst possible consequences is maybe give money to the poorest population, not as energy subsidies, but to supplement their income, and then to think what to do for the next 10 to 30 years and how to get the energy security right.
Absolutely. I wish our European leaders were that intelligent to actually work that out, Gina, because it doesn't look like it at the moment. But can you also share with us, particularly as we mentioned earlier, the situation in Germany and how Putin is using gas as a weapon against the West for its support of Ukraine? Just share with us particularly how Russia is using gas as a strategic weapon to hurt the West, particularly Western Europe.
Well, there's a balance between who is suffering more from this energy war. For now, I think it is certainly the Europeans, because for the Europeans the prices are high, the supply is down. For Russia, they've still been getting a lot of money because the prices were high. They were selling less, but they're still getting a huge amount of revenue. In the long term, I think that Russia's economy is going to suffer very badly also, because eventually the price at a certain stage will probably then reestablish itself around some kind of average norm. And of course, Russia is going to be losing a large segment of its clients. But yes, I think that Putin is hoping that at some stage that the solidarity within Europe is going to brittle, and when things, or if things get too bad, and then that support for Ukraine is going to fall, and that he will be forgiven, and that the Europeans are going to continue or go back to buying a lot of Russian energy. I think that's his end game. I think the governments feel that there's a very strong support for Ukraine. When I was in Belgium a couple of weeks ago, was here. I take taxis, I go to little shops, and I hear people are very unhappy with the situation and are saying, why are we suffering because of Ukraine? So I'm not sure if the governments are in contact with what the people on the streets are thinking. So I think that this is what is Putin's game, is to hope, because the war is not going as quickly or as well as he hoped it would go in the beginning, that he's going to be able to brittle the solidarity between the countries and within the countries. It's a very dangerous game for everybody. It's very dangerous for Russia, it's very dangerous for Europe. It's a very bad situation all around.
But we also see strategically that Russia is now targeting Ukrainian energy power stations so that they go into, so they don't work, so there's no electricity or heating over the winter, because we know the Ukraine gets very, very cold. But also he's threatened to actually shut all the gas supplies off from Russia to Europe. If that's the case, will the situation facing the continent of Europe, particularly Germany, be a lot worse than it is now?
So I don't think that Putin is actually threatened that he's going to cut off all the gas, but the Europeans are all the time considering what might happen if all the gas is cut off. As we know, the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline, no gas is flowing via these two aqueducts. So gas is still flowing via Ukraine and via Turkey. At this moment in time, because there's a very mild weathered Europe, weather is very pleasant, as we know, and is expected to remain so for the next week. So the consumption is low because of the weather. The storage in the whole of Europe is about 85 to 95% full, so there's a lot of gas in storage. People have cut consumption, and of course many people and many companies have gone bankrupt. So we have the convergence of full storages, good weather, people have gone bankrupt, and decisions to cut consumption. So at this moment in time, Europe is managing gas-wise. As you said yourself, if the winter gets very bad, or once the storage gets depleted towards December, January, things will get worse. We have to wait and see what happens. I mean, I think Putin has, of course, threatened that if the Europeans impose a price cap on his oil or gas, then he will not sell to those countries who impose those kind of the sanctions on him. So we have to see what's going to happen.
And also, slightly off topic, but is this also another reason why the American administration and the European Union are pushing for new Iran deals, so we can get Iran's gas back online and energy and oil reserves back online, despite the fact this is the world's most dangerous regime that is on the brink of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. Nuclear weapons, is the leading state sponsor of international terrorism and is an absolute menace on the world scene. And yet, because of our short-term energy needs, Europe is looking also to open those Iranian markets.
Oh, definitely oil is a fundamental aspect of why Biden and Europeans want to re-establish relations with Iran. Iran also has a lot of gas, huge amounts of gas, but it's not very capable of producing and exploring this gas except for its own needs, because it doesn't have the technology. Of course, if the whole relationship was re-established, and companies like Total from France, they are eager to go back and work in Iran, and they could be doing further exploration, and the Chinese also. But definitely energy is a very strong element, and as you say, to replace one rogue country by another rogue country is just as dangerous, and not where the West should be going, in my view.
Absolutely. And Gina, could you explain how Europe's energy crisis could potentially be helped by the Eastern Mediterranean gas reserves that have been discovered, as you mentioned earlier in the programme, in Egypt, Israel and Cyprus, and how Israel has 400 billion cubic metres of gas that could be exported to Europe?
Well, Cyprus and Israel, of course, they have the same cultural thinking process as the West, as Europeans, part of the OECD countries. So very little geopolitical risk to buy from these countries. And yes, Israel has about 400 BCM of spare gas, which it can export, and Cyprus also. Cyprus is part of the European Union. Cyprus also has about the same kind of volume, and together with Egypt, there's about 800 BCM of gas, which is superfluous for this area, for the Eastern Mediterranean, could be exported. The rest of the gas which has been discovered should stay in the region, should stay within Jordan, Cyprus, Egypt and Israel, but 800 BCM So this kind of volume could go between 10 to 20 BCM a year, could be exported to Europe. Good quality gas, 99.8% clean methane gas, from a region which is more or less stable. And so this is what I'm working on a lot, to try and help with these exports between Israel, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt and Europe.
So share with us, relating to this, what your job is as an international natural gas expert and how you are helping the Israeli government, because we know that this is also an amazing cooperation between Israel and the Egyptians, together with those in Cyprus, and even talking about the possibility of cooperating with Greece and Italy to actually build pipelines for this natural gas to be transported up to into Europe.
Well, in Israel and in Cyprus, it's mostly, if not exclusively, it's private companies and public companies doing this. So most of my work is actually on behalf of private companies or these big public companies. But yes, I mean, I'm here in contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I did work for the Ministry of Energy. Because on the geopolitical level, it's very important for the countries to cooperate regionally. And in June, Ursula von der Leyen came over to the region, signed a preliminary contract with the Minister of Energy of Israel and of Egypt to get some extra gas from the region to Europe. So the governments are involved. The government of Israel is not putting any money into any of this project, but is supporting it geopolitically. And of course, the government will get money back, will get money in the form of taxation. My role is, I specialize in the geopolitics of the region, gas contracting, gas pricing, pipeline transmissions, what are the benefits, the hurdles, mostly I think what I'm trying to do is to try to get people to move from talking to doing, because talking is too easy.
Yep.
And on the government level, they like to talk because they get immediate media coverage. But to get something done, you really need to move ahead to the next stage, and I think that's very important.
No, absolutely. And can you share with us the groundbreaking landmark agreement that Israel signed with the European Union on the 5th of June this year, 2022, that for the first time Israel began exporting natural gas to Europe?
Well, see, again, this is a lot of talk, and it's not yet materialized. It's an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, so it's not a final contract. And yes, it's groundbreaking because it means that the Europeans understand that there's the potential to export this gas, but none of it is yet necessarily going directly from Israel to Europe. There is a route between Israel, Egypt, and Egypt has liquefaction facilities, but we are already exporting this volume, and it is not necessarily going directly to Europe. Lots of this gas is going to Turkey, which of course then Turkey could then free some of the gas it's getting from Russia, Iran, Turkmenistan. But this is the beginning, it's the first step. But again, this is more on the line of talking, and we need to try and do a big infrastructure project between Israel and Europe, either pipeline or LNG, and sign a final contract, not an MOU, to get the next phase moving.
Absolutely. And also we've seen in the past year kind of a complete historical change in relations between Turkey and Israel under the Turkish President Erdogan, who's been incredibly hostile for Israel over the past couple of decade or so, even more. But now has kind of welcomed the Israeli ambassador to Ankara back again, is wanting to restore relations with Israel. How much is this down to Erdogan eyeing up this natural gas and seeing that this is a potential massive revenue earner for Turkey, and so therefore he needs Israel's cooperation rather than Israel, as he considered in the past, to be an enemy?
Well, he's been going hot and cold for the last 2 decades. We've had good relations, better relations. 7 or 8 years ago, we were in the middle of negotiations to try and sell gas to Turkey. This was before we signed the contract with Egypt, and Turkey was sure that Israel did not have the option of selling gas to Egypt, and therefore was quite laid back and thought that this option would remain open forever. And then the relationships worsened, and the negotiations stopped, and now it's been renewed, as you say. And I think, yes, very much the gas has helped. Turkey has found itself out of the discussion of this Eastern Gas Mediterranean Forum, because the Palestinians, Jordan, Cyprus, Italy, even France and Egypt and the United European Union, America, the World Bank and Egypt have formed this group, and the only two entities from the region which are out of this group is Lebanon and Turkey. And so Turkey is trying to get back into this sort of group of friendship countries to discuss the issues, and yes, to try and buy gas from Israel and maybe even from Cyprus.
Yeah, and Gina, according to the Times of Israel regarding this new memorandum of understanding with the EU to potentially supply Europe with Israel's natural gas, according to the article, it's worth 1 billion shekels, or that translates into pounds as 263 million pounds a year. How will that boost Israel's economy?
Well, as I said, this is only an MOU, but if we look at the greater picture, and try to make the figures even a bit more positive, if Israel could export, to make it an easy figure, 10 BCM a year, that could bring in between $1 to $2 billion a year to the treasury. That is besides the money that would go to the gas companies, and taxation would be between 1 and 2, could even be $3 billion a year. It's very nice to have. It's nice to have because it's also not dangerous to have, because countries which are too reliant on rent money from the ground, they tend to not to be startup nations, like to say, not to do high tech, not to work hard enough. So this is a very handsome sum of money without posing any risks to cause deterioration in the management of the country or people's willingness to work.
And also, what are the prospects of Israel's ability to sell more gas to Europe, to build more gas pipelines to Egypt and then Cyprus, and to export them from there? What are the prospects of that happening?
So you can have, there's 4 different options. 2 of them include a pipeline and 2 of them include LNG. I'll go with the one which is the most unlikely to happen, unfortunately now, is the pipeline to Turkey. It's of course a direct route into Europe because Turkey is linked with into Bulgaria, into Greece, but because of the difficult relationships we've had with Turkey over the last couple of decades, that's probably the most unlikely route now to get gas between Israel and Europe via Turkey. So the other 2 options include doing another pipeline to Egypt, and use either the existing liquefaction facilities or build new ones. That's it's an option which is examined very seriously. And the other 2 options are doing a liquefaction facility in Israel, or doing a pipeline directly between Israel, Cyprus, Greece and Italy. Direct pipeline from A to B, directly into Europe. So these projects are being examined by the gas companies, by the governments, by the buyers, by regulators. No decision has been made yet on which one is the best one. At different times, different options look better. Hopefully within the next few months, 1 or 2 of these options might start going ahead.
So what sums of money we're talking about to build a possible gas pipeline from Israel to then Cyprus and Greece, and then going on to Italy to actually supply Europe directly with gas? And how much percentage do you think that Israel could supply Europe in terms of its gas needs?
Well, a pipeline would cost about $7 billion, 7 billion euros, something like that. You could take the gas from Israel, you could sort of link in gas from Cyprus. It could start at 11 BCM a year. 1 BCM could sort of go off into Cyprus, 10 BCM into Europe. And then if that was working well, all you'd have to do is put compressors in these pipelines, and then you can increase the quantity to up to 20 BCM a year. So if Europe was getting 155 BCM from Russia, if you could get 20 BCM from the region, it's an interesting volume, especially if one considers the 155 BCM was getting from Russia. Some of it is LNG from Russia, and that LNG is still going to remain in the market. So only have to maybe sort of replace 130 BCM of Russian gas. You get 20 from our region. It becomes a considerable volume. And I'll just go one step further. I don't think that Europe can afford to cut itself off completely from Russian pipeline gas. So if you continue to take 25, 30 BCM of pipeline gas and LNG, so then if you can get 20 from Israel and Cyprus out of the 100, it's not going to be taking any more from Russia. It's a considerable volume.
Absolutely. And can you explain to our viewers as well what a BCM is?
BCM is it's billion cubic meters. So Europe consumes about 500. If you take Europe, including Norway, England, and Turkey, about 500 a year. 500 BCM a year. Russia was selling, as I said, 155 BCM a year, billion cubic meters a year.
That's excellent. And also, what do you think of the prospect of Israel building a liquidation? Is it liquidization plant?
Liquefaction.
I mean, where would Israel get the finances to do that? Would that come through private money? And how much would that then, by Israel doing that, would boost Israel's kind of revenues a year?
Well, the two main prospects are doing a liquefaction facility at the sea, offshore, not on the shore, at sea. It's easier because it's a small country, or a pipeline. Both of these projects, either a pipeline or a liquefaction facility, would cost about $7 or $8 billion for that same kind of volume of 10 BCM of year. Going back, that 10 BCM of year would bring into Israel between $1 to $3 billion a year to the state treasury.
And let's paint the scenario where Europe agrees to build these gas pipelines from Israel to Italy. Also, Israel builds a liquidization plant as well in the North Sea. How much revenue do you think then, if all these grand plans that Israel could potentially pursue, how much money do you think that would bring in for the Israeli economy?
If we had 20 BCM,
yep.
110 from liquefaction, 10 either via Egypt or directly, it could bring in, it could easily bring in $5 billion a year. But again, the money is very nice to have. But Israel is quite, the economy of Israel is doing quite well. Unemployment is quite low. The shekel, our currency, is very high. So our budget is something like $150, $160 billion a year for a small country. So having another 5 a year is very nice, but it's not life-saving. What is life-saving is having the energy for ourselves. It's reducing the emissions, reducing the pollution. What is life-saving is having relations with Jordan and Egypt. And if we can improve our relation with Europe and sell gas to Europe, so it's not just the money, it's the whole plethora of all these things together, which is life-saving or very, very important.
Absolutely. And Gina, about 9 or 8 minutes left of the programme as well. So can you just explain to us what this potential gas agreement with Lebanon is all about, knowing that certainly Lebanon is controlled by the Iranians through their proxy terrorist organisation, Hezbollah?
Well, geology knows no borders, of course. So there is a potential gas field on the northern Israeli border, which is the southern border of Lebanon. For many years, this has remained dormant because a lot of sea. Gas was either not the flavor of the month or not at all of any interest. But with the crisis, with the high gas prices, with this Greek-English company that just brought over a rig to Israel in June called Energean, which is going to start producing. In fact, they just got the permission yesterday from the Ministry of Energy that they can start producing gas from this field, which is located in the north of Israel. The Lebanese woke up, partially induced by threats from this terrorist organization, Hezbollah, saying, well, you know, if you're going to be producing gas from northern Israel, we want to be producing gas from southern Lebanon. And all this came to a head and pushed Lebanon and Israel to restart negotiations on where this borderline should come. The discrepancy was 860 square kilometers. And last week, finally, an agreement was reached, thanks to American mediation. And bottom line is that the Lebanese are going to be drilling in that area via a company called Total, a French company, and an Italian company called ENI. Most of that gas, if it is discovered, belongs to the Lebanese in any case. A proportion of it, between 15% and 20%, if it is discovered, will belong to Israel. Then Total will pay Israel for that portion of the gas. It gives Lebanon hope, which is important for Israel. Even it's Hezbollah, Iranian controlled, but people are still living there, and lots of them are Christians and could have, good relations with Lebanon. It is our neighbor. Neighbors are important. They have no electricity. They have blackouts. You're talking about blackouts here, but they have blackouts 20 hours a day. And if they had a rig there and they had hope, it would be better for everybody in the region, especially for Israel and for Lebanon. So this is the agreement which has been reached. It's going to be passed tomorrow by the government. It was signed by the president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, last week. And it adds stability, it adds peace, it can only do good, I think.
Absolutely, because the Lebanon people are in a dire situation well, of course we saw that horrendous explosion in the centre of Beirut back in August of 2020. And of course the Lebanese people are in an absolute dire strait. So how do you think this new gas agreement could actually benefit the Lebanese people rather than benefiting the Hezbollah terrorist organisation?
Well, the main thing it does is that it gives hope, because it's not a gas agreement yet, it's a border agreement. It's a border agreement where there might be gas. But if there's no border agreement, then if there is gas there, it will never be discovered because no international company is going to come and drill. This agreement has enabled the gas company to agree to go and drill in an area which beforehand was too complicated for them to work there. So now they have hope. Hope is important. If gas is discovered, it means that the Lebanese will have enough primary energy to have electricity. In the meantime, they have only one power station which can work on electricity. It can bring them money. It would weaken then Hezbollah. If there is gas, it would weaken Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is trying to get or is buying energy from Iran, which reinforces Iran and Hezbollah. So it would weaken Hezbollah, which is only good for everybody concerned.
And Gina, we know that the world is wanting to push towards renewable energy and clean energy, and this is also why the Saudis, particularly Mohammed bin Salman, is wanting to build this mega city in the desert in Saudi Arabia known as Neom, to wean Saudi Arabia off oil production and to really kind of compete with Dubai, and is willing to spend anything in the region of $500 billion US dollars to equivalent of $1 trillion US dollars on this new building project. What does the future hold, do you think, in your opinion, for the oil gas industry, knowing that the world is wanting to move away from that form of energy, even though it's so dependent and reliable?
Well, I think it's important to go for renewable energy because of security of supply. Because of the danger of being over-reliant on gas from Russia, or certainly oil from Saudi Arabia or Iran or Venezuela, it is important for each country to be able to have its own renewable energy, not in my view because of climate risk, but because of security of supply. If you have a solar heater on your roof, then nobody can cut you off from your electricity from 7 to 9. You have your solar heater or your solar electricity. So from that point of view, it is very important. But the world is definitely going to continue needing oil and gas. Hopefully not coal, because coal is a pollutant, very dangerous pollutant, but oil and gas beyond 2015, which is the target for net zero emissions. So it's going to be needing oil and gas definitely for another half a century. But because the world is irreversibly going towards renewable energy for the right or wrong reasons, then countries like Saudi Arabia, of course, they have to diversify. They can't ignore trends that countries are doing. They have to diversify not only their energy, but also their potential revenues. So this is part of the part of the portfolio of what they have to do.
Yeah, and how much do you think Israel's talents and expertise, and you're a classic example, Gina, of Israel's intelligence and expertise, particularly in the field of natural gas, how is Israel to be able in the future to use this potential massive money earner in supplying natural gas to Europe in combination with Israel's startup nation, its innovation and its technology, to become one of the global leaders in the world in providing answers to global problems?
Well, the whole delegation is going to Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP meeting there in November. I think a large proportion of them are high-tech companies which want to be able to help in the solutions and the technology solutions. So it's not that Israel has so much solar energy, because we're a very small country. So solar power needs a lot of area, and we don't have a lot of area, but we can help in technology. So this is definitely one of the things, the combination of the gas we've discovered, the technology, to be able to help move ahead.
Gina, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report today, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge, and particularly this wonderful gift that God has given the nation of Israel, and that's a huge supply of natural gas. And I want to thank you for watching this program today. I'm sure, like myself, that you've learned a lot from this program, and how Israel is actually a blessing unto the nations, that Israel is a light unto the nations, and particularly now with Israel being able to sell its natural gas can make a huge difference to Europe's energy crisis. And we'll leave you with this excellent video produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that actually looks at this growing connection and cooperation between the Israeli government, the Egyptian government, and also Cyprus in potentially a new gas agreement. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.